Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 647. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about art museums and Western culture, hikes, petroglyphs, and saguaro cactus as we go to Phoenix, Arizona.
I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Let's talk about Phoenix. I'd like to welcome back to the show Cindy Carlsson from explorationvacation.net, who has come to talk to us about Phoenix. Cindy, welcome to the show.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Or welcome back to the show. Cindy was here about 100 episodes ago. I was surprised it was that long ago, talking about Northern Vietnam. And if you haven't heard that episode, I like that episode, obviously, because otherwise she wouldn't be back. So, Cindy, we are talking about a much more domestic destination this time. And what's your connection with Phoenix?
My mother's been down there about 30 years now, and so I've been going down there pretty regularly since about 1995, spending sometimes just a few days and sometimes spending even a couple weeks down there exploring the area.
Excellent. So she is a snowbird in the language of the area.
Yes, my parents are snowbirds. I'd be a snowbird if I could convince my husband to spend more time down there, but he likes his books.
It gets a tad warm in the summer for me in Phoenix. And just so we know, we usually don't talk about weather for a while, but one of the reasons a lot of people come down in the wintertime, lovely, lovely weather. Summertime, they'll get 100 days in a row that'll go above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So that just may be something you think about. We have a friend who moved to Phoenix because the summers here in San Jose that only got to 90 were not hot enough for her. So if you like the hot weather, that's definitely a good time to go. A lot more people there in the winter.
And there's a lot to do, actually. I haven't been there in the summer, but there's a lot to do in the summer inside. And there's actually water and rivers and floats and things. I have a lot of friends that live there year round, and they actually say summers aren't always that bad.
Right. Well, and it depends, again, what you like. And I do know that the friends who go out hiking tend to do it early in the morning in the summertime or later in the evening, usually early in the morning when it's the coolest time of day. But what kind of itinerary do you recommend for us for Phoenix?
So I've tried to put together an itinerary that's really aimed at first-time visitors to Phoenix. It gives them an idea of what Phoenix is about, where it came from, what the landscape's like, and what the people who've lived there past and present are like. And it's 5 days because 5 days seems to be, to me, a good amount of time to get a real feeling for Phoenix.
Okay.
It still leaves you enough time that if you want to spend a lot of time golfing or laying by the pool, or you want to make a trip up to Grand Canyon, which I know you've covered on one of your previous shows.
Right.
You can add that on, and then it's a week's vacation and still do all the stuff that I'm recommending.
Well, yeah, and we won't talk quite as much about side trips, but there are a number of different things if you head north or south, either down to Tucson, and we've done an episode on that, or up to Flagstaff area, up to Grand Canyon, or even up to the northeast corner of the state. We've got different shows about northern Phoenix, so we won't be talking about them now. But what should we do in Phoenix? Well, and actually, let me back up a bit here. I should start with, why should we go to Phoenix of all the places we should go to?
So I think Phoenix gets a bad rap as a snowboard destination. Oh, it's just where the retirees go because it's warm there. It's hot in the summer. Why would you ever go to Phoenix? And Phoenix, particularly in the last 15 years, 20 years maybe now, has really become a arts and culture hub. It's got a thriving, lively downtown, a great art scene. It, of course, has spectacular scenery all around the city with the Sonoran Desert there. It's become a real interesting place to go. And there's something there, I think, for everyone. And it's really a worthwhile destination. There's a lot to see in Phoenix that you probably won't see in other places.
The only part of that I would challenge is that has only happened over the last 10 or 15 years, because I've been going there longer than that, and I think it's getting better known for that over the last 10, 15 years. I think that's been there for a while in terms of the arts and culture.
I think part of it is as the light rails come in, maybe it's more that it's expanded. Places like downtown Mesa that used to be really dead are now little arts hubs.
Okay.
And so maybe that's it, because it's been building. I've always liked Phoenix, but I think it's really become something that a lot of people don't expect.
Excellent. And where should we start?
So I'm going to suggest that people start by learning about the Sonoran Desert by actually going out to the Desert Botanical Garden, which is in North Phoenix. It's a beautiful place. As a botanical garden, it, of course, has landscaped areas and non-native plants, but it also has large areas of native plants. It's a great place to soak in the beauty of the desert and to learn about the desert, so that when you go out hiking on your own, you know that even those chala cactuses might look really friendly and fuzzy, not to get near them. So it gives you both that introduction to the desert as well as beautiful place to wander. You can easily spend a few hours or a half day there. They have a fabulous cafe, so it's a nice place to spend some time in the garden and then wander to the cafe.
Well, I want to make sure that we're talking about the same place, because the Desert Botanical Garden that I know is not in North Phoenix. It's almost in Scottsdale, so it would be east of Phoenix.
It's right on the border of Scottsdale and Phoenix.
Yeah, that's not North Phoenix. That's east.
East Phoenix. Okay, you're right. And that's another thing I should mention, that I have geographic dyslexia when it comes to Phoenix. So keep me honest, because I may say west when I really mean east. It's over by Scottsdale, and it's beautiful. It's right at the foot of the mountains, a beautiful place to walk and wander.
I happened to see it the first time when there was a Chihuly exhibit, so my experience there is quite different, because there was all sorts of glass being shown at the same time. But a wonderful place, especially for kids too. I would recommend. Our kids love the butterfly exhibit, for instance, there, as well as some of the other things.
And they've actually redone the garden since you've been there, since the Chihuly exhibit. And there are still Chihulys and some other sculptures in the garden. They do special events. So visitors coming into Phoenix should check the schedule and see. They sometimes do big fun parties out in the garden at night and different things. Can be hard to get tickets to those, but they're a blast if you can get them.
Excellent.
So because that's not necessarily a full day, if you want to do a little more that day, I would continue on towards the west to the Pueblo Grande Museum, which it's a museum and an archaeological park. It's a fairly small museum, but they do a really nice job of talking about the Hohokam people who lived in the Phoenix area more than 1,000 years ago. They actually were the original ones building canals in the Salt River Valley. Canals bring all of Phoenix's water in today, but that actually goes back to the ancient culture that lived there more than 1,000 years ago. It's a nice little museum. The archaeological site itself isn't terribly interesting. There's not a lot left, but the museum does a nice job of introducing you to what this area was like and the people who lived there a long time ago. The other alternative to end out your first day would be, if it's on a Thursday, head over to Scottsdale and do the evening art walk and have dinner down in the Arts District in historic Scottsdale, which is a really fun place. And I'll talk about that a little more in the next day.
Okay. And we should say we haven't really even gone very far from the Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport here for the first two stops. The Desert Botanical Gardens, the Pueblo Grande Museum are practically stone's throw from the airport. So we haven't ranged very far afield yet. This is all fairly easy to get to.
A stone's throw for Phoenix anyway, which is a gigantic, enormous area geographically.
It is a very large area geographically. That's right.
All right. For day 2, I actually put together 2 different options, depending on a visitor's level of interest in native cultures or cowboy culture. I've got 2 different options.
Okay.
The one would be to learn more about the people who live in the Southwest today. And that would be a trip to the Heard Museum in downtown Phoenix, even closer to Sky Harbor Airport. We haven't left really Phoenix at all for these 2 days. The Heard is both a cultural history and an art museum. About half the museum or more is devoted to exhibits on the peoples of the Southwest, with separate areas on each different culture, and both modern and historic pieces of art and basketry and different daily items of daily life. The other part of the museum includes an exhibit which, in my part of the country, is something people don't know as much about, is the Indian boarding school era. They've just redone the exhibit. I haven't seen the new one, but the old one was both fascinating and really heartbreaking, but really, really interesting. Again, mostly history, but combining modern perspectives and information as well, and presenting it in a way that's very, very accessible. The exhibit's really geared for both adults and for children.
Well, and the era you're talking about here is an era where they want to, depending on how you how you look at this, the one side would say they wanted to include the Native Americans in American culture, and therefore they wanted to enculturate them, and the other side would say that they wanted them to lose their identity as Native Americans and enculturate them. But it was definitely a very intentional move to bring them in, to have them move away from their families, to go to these boarding schools, and to turn them into white people, would be the crude way of saying that.
Yeah, it's a very complicated history, and it's a very painful history. And although it's mixed, for some people that experience, as much as it had some negative sides, it also brought good things to them. Others found it just devastating. And they try to deal with all that in a really meaningful and, I think, respectful way at the Heard. The Heard it's mostly Native curators, and so they do a really nice job at dealing with those complicated issues. The other thing the Heard is a arts museum, contemporary or more historic pieces of art, usually all native arts. Their most recent show featured Yupik masks from Alaska combined with works by Matisse, because he had used some of these masks as inspiration in his work. Generally, though, the shows are focused on native arts and native artists. The shows are always splendid, really high quality works. If you're at all interested in native art and the contemporary native art scene, the Heard will have something spectacular. They have the finest collection definitely in the West, and probably some of their collection is probably equal to some of the collection at the National Museum of the American Indian. They really do a nice job with their shows. Mm-hmm. Depending on how long you stay at the Heard, you have a couple other options for the day. You are right downtown at the Heard. You're in an old historic neighborhood. You're just north of the Phoenix Art Museum. The Phoenix Art Museum has a lovely collection. They are pretty much the standard big city museum. They have a lovely collection, but it's not Phoenix specific for the most part. The exception to that is their photo exhibit draws from the Arizona State University collection and usually has some really interesting things in it. And they do spectacular special exhibits. So if you're an art person, you might just want to walk down the street and spend the rest of the day at PAM. I did forget to mention that at the Herd, have lunch before you leave the Herd. They have a fabulous cafeteria. Then head on to whatever else. The PAM would be one of them, the Phoenix Art Museum. The other option, if you kind of had enough art for the day or want a little smaller museum, is to get in your car and head over to the smaller museum at the Arizona State Capitol. It's the Arizona State Capitol Museum. It's the old Capitol building. They've preserved a few rooms in the building, but they have some really interesting exhibits in there. It's not very big, but they have a exhibit on the Arizona, the warship, which was sunk in Pearl Harbor, and some memorabilia from some of the survivors, as well as, this was news to me, that all these ships have fine china and silver and fancy settings like you'd see at some Victorian dinner party. And they have all that on display there as well. They also have some very interesting displays on the beginnings of Arizona as a state and the establishment of the state, including the fact that Arizona kind of played a dirty trick to get into the U.S. as a state. They were required to change something in their provisions for how they handled their judges, and Arizona didn't like what the federal government wanted them to do, so they went ahead and did it to become a state. And then as soon as they were a state, they went and undid it and did it the way they wanted to. And there's a whole section on it. It's really quite interesting. So those are my day 2 option number 1. My option number 2 is to go back up, if you haven't been to Scottsdale, to go to Scottsdale and do Western Spirit. I don't know, have you been to Western Spirit in Scottsdale, Chris?
I do not know where you speak of with Western Spirit. Okay. I have been to Scottsdale, but...
Well, this is a relatively new museum. It's maybe 5 years old at the most.
Okay.
They're trying to capture the full extent of the life and population and changes in the West. And it has several components. It's a fine art museum more than a history museum, although it does have historic pieces. One piece of the museum is a cowboy collection or Western collection that has things like spurs and saddles and all the things you'd expect in like a cowboy museum or an Old West museum, except most of the pieces were collected because of their artistic value more so than as artifacts of the Old West. That's a fun place for kids, but it's kind of cool for everybody because they have all this stuff and you start looking at it and you're like, wow, I never knew spurs could be that interesting. But they can be. Part of the museum is fine art. Mostly they've been expanding what they've been showing. They usually always have a big section by a prominent bronze artist who does cowboy art and features Native Americans, although he's not Native American himself. But they've added now a Western movie poster collection that they acquired. So there's usually some sort of Western movie themed exhibit. They've also added a collection of Hopi classic, historic, and contemporary, but mostly historic Hopi pottery that they always have some of on display. And then they have some other traveling exhibits. They've had Western cartoons. They've had the Taos painters, different things, but very much art-based. Most of the first floor is very much art-based, except for the movie posters and the Western cowboy things. The second floor has 2 semi-permanent exhibits, one of which saved till last because it's kind of exhausting. It's a fine, it's interesting. He's laughing. It's a fine art exhibit that tells the story of the settlement of the West.
Okay.
And meeting of the natives and the Anglos as they started settling the West. It's a big exhibit and it's interesting, but more interesting is the other half, which has it has some fine art, but it mostly has more what we would consider artifacts and objects. So it has some artifacts and things from the Lewis and Clark exhibition. It has a collection of spectacular chief's blankets. It has a bunch of Curtis, and they've changed this since I was there the first time, of original Curtis images of Native Americans and showing all the different printing processes he used, which was something I had never seen the gold tones and some of that before. And so that was really interesting. It's got a fabulous mix of items and again, a very large exhibit. So this is a museum that if you want to see everything, it will take most of the day.
Let's take a break here and hear from a sponsor. With all the recent news of online security breaches, it's hard not to worry about where your data goes. Making an online purchase or simply accessing your email could put your private information at risk. I hope you know the danger of connecting to the Wi-Fi in the airport or in a local coffee shop, but did you just see that AT&T has been selling your data and other companies have been as well, your browser history so that they can target you? You can protect your data and your privacy by using a VPN. I have installed ExpressVPN. They have an easy-to-use app that runs seamlessly in the background on your computer, your phone, or your tablet. You can turn on protection with one click. It secures and anonymizes your internet browsing by encrypting your data. It costs less than $7 a month, and it's the #1 rated VPN service by TechRadar. Protect your online activity today and find out how you can get 3 months free at expressvpn.com/travel. That's expressvpn.com/travel for 3 months free with a 1-year package. And thanks to ExpressVPN for sponsoring Amateur Traveler.
Well, and it's interesting that's in Scottsdale because of the cities. So Phoenix, there's Phoenix downtown, and we didn't say, but there's all sorts of different places we'll be talking about around it, including Scottsdale to the east. And Scottsdale, I would say, of the places that I have been in the area, is the most cowboy town. That the downtown Scottsdale has more cowboy art exhibits and stores and things like that, and has more of that Western heritage.
I think they call themselves the most Western town in the West.
Yeah. And I love downtown Scottsdale. It's an arty town with this Western heritage. And my grandfather actually was a cowboy. So I have a fondness for the Western heritage. I mean,
Cool.
we have his spurs. He was on the last roundup in Colorado when he was 16. He busted broncs. I mean, so I have some connection to this, although I myself am not a cowboy. I would say, too, if you're bringing kids along and being in a Western museum all day seems like that might be the seventh layer of hell for you, you might instead, if you want to get in touch with the Western heritage, take them up to Rawhide, which is a wonderfully touristy, cheesy Western recreation town in northern Scottsdale that is more of a kid-friendly way to look at some of the Western culture.
I'm so glad you added that. I have not been to Rawhide. I was looking at that the other day going, I have to get up there.
I took my kids there as a kid. We enjoyed it. I mean, it's touristy, it's cheesy, but it's great.
Western Spirit has some sections for kids, and the Western area part of it has got some good stuff, but both the Herd and Western Spirit are pretty adult-oriented museums. I'm glad you mentioned the Old Town Scottsdale, because that would be my other recommendation is once you finish, the Western Spirit is actually right along that area where all the galleries and auction houses and studios and things are. And they've got that fixed up as a mall. You can go down, you can walk and do some window shopping. You can go in the galleries. There's a whole range of art. There's the Western art, but now there's a lot non-Western themes done by Western artists, contemporary artists, than there was a few years ago. There's a lot of good restaurants there.
A lot of good restaurants in there. Yeah.
No problem finding some place to eat.
Did you have one you would recommend? I was looking to see if there were any that I could recommend, but none are occurring to me.
Cafe Forte.
Okay.
It's right down on that end, and it's a lovely, lovely spot. They do very beautiful dinners and nice lunches there. We've eaten there a couple times. It's not a budget place, but it's not super expensive either. And also for art lovers, if you're really into art and want something different, if you're feeling a little overwhelmed by native and Western art, the Scottsdale Contemporary Art Gallery is down at the end of the mall. And that is a completely different, small museum, only usually 4, maybe 5 exhibits on, installations more often, but really interesting, edgy stuff. So if you want a little change of pace, that's a good place to walk down to and see what's happening. And as I'd mentioned, Thursdays are their art night. Most of the year they have galleries are open late, the museums are open late, things are free, or most of the things are free. And you can walk around and it's kind of an event and it's a lot of fun to do something like that.
Excellent.
Ah, bon chien. Bonjour, je suis Theo, a tour leader with Explore. And this is Punti. He's helping us find truffles under the trees next to this beautiful vineyard. Maybe for tomorrow's cooking class? Oui, call semi-heure. Parfait. Semi-o'clock. Not everyone gets to enjoy a Bordeaux sunset this way, but you will if you explore. No, Punti. Search exploreworldwide.com and don't just travel. Explore.
Where to next?
Day 3, I think it's time to get out in the Sonoran Desert a little farther. I'd recommend taking a hike. Phoenix is a great city for hiking or biking or just getting out in nature. You can hike right in the city of Phoenix, but as you go towards the edges of Phoenix, you have the mountain parks, which are spectacular. There's some parks that we've really liked because they have a nice mix of trails and fabulous scenery. Include the mountain parks right in town, and also
And when you say the
then
mountain parks, you're thinking of the Phoenix Mountains Preserve?
I'm thinking of all of those so Usury Mountain Park,
Okay.
Dowell Park, farther out is Lost
Got it.
Dutchman.
Okay, you're further out. Okay.
The problem with the parks, like doing the Camelback hike, is that you're there with 10,000 other people.
So, and the Camelback, so there are places to hike inside the city. I've been in Phoenix Mountain Preserve, which is an easy hike, and then there's Camelback Mountain, which is between Phoenix and Scottsdale, which is a much more strenuous hike, but a very popular hike, especially to go up there for sunrise is a very popular thing to do. But yeah, it is more popular.
While you can get around Phoenix proper, Phoenix and Mesa and Tempe without a car because of the light rail. You cannot get to Scottsdale on the light rail, but you can get to the others. Generally, Phoenix is so much easier with a car. And if you have a car, like I say, North Cave Creek that's a beautiful park. It's not too far out of the city if you're staying up in Scottsdale.
Okay.
I generally stay on the east end of the city. I generally stay way out in Mesa, the eastern end of Mesa, or in Apache Junction. And from there, Lost Dutchman State Park is just stunningly beautiful. Usury Mountain Recreation Area. There's a number of trails out there that are spectacular and take you right up into the edge of the Superstition Mountains. So you have the desert and you have the mountains, and when flowers are in bloom, it's a gorgeous area.
Do you have a particular trail you recommend that you remember by name?
Well, there's 2 suggestions. One is just about any of the lower trails in Lost Dutchman are fabulous. They're beautiful.
Okay.
And then there's a trail, if you want to go all the way out to Gold Canyon, which is at that far edge of the mountains at the Phoenix area, there's a trail out there called the Hieroglyphics Trail, which it's a not too difficult trail now. I haven't been out there in a few years, but it's still open. It's a not too difficult trail that leads out to a basin where there's sometimes a waterfall. There's always usually a pool, and then there's petroglyphs on all the cliffside. Some of them you walk right past. The first time I was out there, we were looking for the petroglyphs, and we were looking so hard for them, thinking they'd be hard to find, that we actually walked by them. I turned around at some point and looked at my girlfriend, and the petroglyphs were like over her shoulder right there, like where you could touch them. So that's a spectacular hike, and it's not a terribly hard hike. Please don't damage the petroglyphs and don't touch them while you're out there, because you could. That damages the artwork. But that's a spectacular hike on that end. Like I say, we've gone out. Cave Creek in the north has some wonderful, easy hikes. I'm kind of a wimpy hiker these days, so.
That's all right.
But I would spend the day and just take your time and do one of the parks and enjoy the desert. And again, if you're out there in the spring, the flowers in the desert are spectacular, just spectacular. So that's my day 3, is spend your time out in forest hiking around, or in the mountain forest, or in the desert area hiking around. Day 4, I am going to suggest something that has nothing to do with Phoenix, except that it's the only place you'll find this. And that is the Musical Instrument Museum.
Oh, good. I was going to get there if you didn't. All right. And it's not the only place you'll find it, but we'll talk about that.
Yeah, I'm hoping to see the other one this spring. So the Musical Instrument Museum, ignore the name. It's a music museum.
Ignore the name. There are instruments in the museum, so that is not inaccurate.
But it isn't the totality of the museum.
Okay.
It's really about music and the people who make music, as well as the instruments. It's experiential in that you put on a set of headphones as you walk through the museum, and as you look at an exhibit, if you turn to watch a classic performance on video, you'll hear all the sound over your headphones. If you go up and look at Balinese instruments, as you look at the gamelan, you'll start to hear the gamelan play in your headphones. If you're watching classic rock somewhere, again, you'll hear this. Sometimes there's narration, but usually it's just the music. It's a fascinating museum to go through. And the shows they have, their special exhibits include things like women's rockers costumes, or we went to one that was it was an art exhibit. I don't remember what they called it, but it was like dragons and vines, and it was all the inlaid guitars and musical instruments from around the world and from the US. And it was just an incredibly beautiful show. I know you've been there, Chris. Wouldn't you say that there's something there for absolutely everybody?
I have not been there. My wife has been there to this one. I have been to the one that inspired it in Brussels, but I have not been to this one yet.
Oh, well, you need to get there because it's unbelievably fun and it leave a lot of time. We left about 3 hours to do the museum. We took my mother there and we figured she'd be bored in 3 hours, and she wasn't bored and we weren't bored, and the museum was closing. And so we were very disappointed that we hadn't left more time.
That's the same thing I heard from my wife. It was a trip where I drove back from Phoenix, San Jose, California, which is home for me, and my wife flew back, so she had a little more time that day to go and explore, and went with friends of ours and thoroughly enjoyed it. Yeah, it is a very good reputation, but I haven't personally been there.
I'm going to check out the one in Brussels this spring, I hope, so I can compare the two. But I was very, very impressed. And for lovers of more world music or more interesting things you don't usually see in concerts, they have a beautiful, beautiful studio concert space there, and they do a full range of music performances through the winter at least. And so if you're heading to town, you can check out and see there might be something really unusual there that you are unlikely to hear somewhere else. And it's a beautiful space to hear music in.
Excellent.
While you're out in that end of Scottsdale, I think it is.
It's way north in Scottsdale, so maybe it is Scottsdale. I'm not sure.
It's kind of Scottsdale, Phoenix, somewhere over there. They trip me up because most things just say Phoenix in the address, and so you're not really sure.
There is a loop of highways that kind of, to me, defines the main part of town, and this is 101 on the north and 10 on the south, and this is the northeast corner of that loop.
It's out a ways compared to the other places we've talked about.
Yep.
While you're there, it's farther west still for something, again, a little different, but now only probably in Phoenix. There's a place called the Deer Valley Petroglyphs.
Okay.
A Deer Valley Petroglyph Preserve. There are petroglyphs, as I'd mentioned, on the Hieroglyphics Trail. There's actually petroglyphs you can see on the South Mountain hike. But Deer Valley has a whole hillside of boulders with hundreds and hundreds of petroglyphs. They have a interpretive center that talks about the petroglyphs, that talks about the area and settlement in the area. It's a really pleasant little site. And if you're like me, really bad at spotting petroglyphs, these are, even if you can't find them, I don't know how you couldn't, they're right in front of you, but they have volunteers out there to help you see the petroglyphs and will show you where they are and point them out. So if you want to see petroglyphs, it's handicapped accessible. It's an easy place to see a little bit more about the history of the area and see these ancient petroglyphs. It's a really interesting spot, and it's a good extra spot to run to if you're out at the Musical Instrument Museum, because it's kind of in that corner of more inner urban area.
Okay.
So for my last day, I am proposing that you leave that civilized Phoenix area behind and head out into the Superstition Mountains.
Okay.
The Superstitions are on the east, the east border of the Phoenix area. Beautiful, rugged mountains. They don't look like they're as rugged as they actually are. There's a roadway into the Superstitions, a historic roadway called the Apache Trail. If you go out to Lost Dutchman and some of the mountain parks out that direction, you go right on the Apache Trail or up to it for a while. The Apache Trail, the first half of the trail is a paved road. It's very scenic, but it's in pretty good condition. It's an easy drive. Anyone can drive it. A good half-day trip would be to take the trail out to Canyon Lake and take a cruise on the steamboat Dolly, which will take you down along Canyon Lake and into its back. They're not really backwaters, but the little offshoots. Canyon Lake is a reservoir. It's a flooded canyon. It has steep cliffs, lots of desert scenery. You might even see some bighorn sheep and some wildlife while you're out. It's just a really pleasant little cruise. Either before or after the Dolly, you should continue down the road to Tortilla Flat, which is either a restored, revived ghost town or a completely rebuilt ghost town. The original Tortilla Flat mostly burned down many, many, many years ago. They have a little restaurant out there. There's a teensy tiny museum. But the restaurant is actually fairly good. Actually, it's really good. but it's very Western themed, saddles for bar stools and that sort of thing. It's an interesting, quirky place with decent food. Makes a really good stop for either before or after your cruise when you go out there. It's about a half day trip to go out, do the cruise, have a meal at Tortilla Flats, and then drive back. For the more adventurous, the fun part of the road starts after Tortilla Flat. Skip the cruise unless you want a really long day, but you could do both. Once you pass Tortilla Flat, you get to a hill, and when you go down the hill, the road turns to dirt. It's basically the same unpaved road it was in 1936 when it was last used as the main highway between Apache Junction, between Phoenix and Payson. And you are stepping back in time. It's one lane in some places. If you make it through Fish Creek, through the steep descent, the twists, the one lane blind curves, and that area, then the rest of the road is pretty drivable. Always check the weather before you go to make sure the road isn't in terrible shape or washed out from rains. It was recently graded the last time we were out there. There are some guardrails. There aren't a lot of guardrails because it's a historic road. They apparently can't do much to widen it or improve it, but that's part of the adventure. It's a stunning drive. It's a dusty drive. There are some places to stop where you can admire the scenery, admire the wildflowers. There's actually another lake farther down, Apache Lake. There's a little resort and marina down there. When you get to the end of the road, there's a big dam area, which creates another lake, Roosevelt Lake, which is a big recreation area. And once you get all the way to the end, and it's only about 25 miles on the unpaved portion, but plan at least an hour or more to drive that part. You cannot drive it over about 30 miles an hour. Most of it, and some of it is a lot slower than that. You don't need a high clearance vehicle most of the time. It's not a bad idea, but you can drive it most of the time in a sedan without any problem. But for the adventurous drivers, it's a gorgeous drive. When you get to the end, you can stop and take a break at Roosevelt Lake, and then you either can go back the way you came, or there's a state highway that runs through it's the Tonto National Forest. It's a lovely area, partly desert, partly forested, and takes you back down south to down in Globe and coming across from Globe and Superior. There's another botanical garden down there that's spectacular if you want to do some more flowers, if you're there in flower season. You can tell my thing is flower season.
So flower season would be early spring?
It varies by year, but usually starting late February. The poppies sometimes mid-February, but March and into early April is usually when the wildflowers. And this year, if any of your listeners are thinking about going, this should be a great year for flowers. They've had a lot of rain this winter. It should be really, really beautiful through it's already starting to bloom, even through all of March should be really, really nice. And the weather's beautiful then.
Well, and March is the high season, and we'll get into that in a little bit because there's a reason why it's the high season. It's the high part of the high season, actually. The winter is the high season. Go ahead. You were talking about flowers, though.
That drive gives you some spectacular flowers the whole way when you come down, and when you get down, it's Boyce Thompson Arboretum down in Superior, which is again at that far, far southeastern edge of the Phoenix metro area. It's really, I wouldn't consider it part of the Phoenix metro area, but technically it actually is.
Okay.
It's a spectacular drive, and that garden is spectacular too. So that's it'd be a full day, but if someone wants to do something like that, it gets you out of town and gets you out into the desert, which is sort of nice if you've been spending all of your time right in the Phoenix area. That's only 5 days. There's other things you could do. I did not mention Taliesin, which is Frank Lloyd Wright's.
I was going to mention that. Okay.
Winter residence. It's a very interesting place to tour.
I think it's an interesting place to tour if you're an architecture geek, which I happen to be. I'm not sure that I would recommend it for anybody who's not a real fan of architecture. But if you are, yeah, this is a very major site. In fact, it is on the list of possible UNESCO World Heritage Site as a multi-site portion about Frank Lloyd Wright.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Yeah, no, I would agree that you need to be an architecture fan, and partly because it's quite expensive to tour it. It's not a budget tour, and you have to buy a tour to do it. For architecture fans in general, Phoenix is a great city because it developed so much in the 40s and particularly the 50s and 60s. So it's a mid-century modern stuff everywhere. They do a mid-century modern week in March. There's just lots and lots of interesting architecture from that period, as well as some really interesting modern. A lot of the civic buildings that were built 20, 30 years ago or more recently are just really spectacular, both in Phoenix and in Scottsdale. In particular, the Western Spirit in Scottsdale is an architecturally very interesting building with a lot of sustainability features and just really interesting features. There's a PAM, the Phoenix Art Museum, is a real interesting building. There's a lot of really interesting buildings. But for Frank Lloyd Wright fans, this is one of the big ones.
Yep.
The other thing I didn't mention is for fans of either Western art in general, cowboy art, or Native American art, there's a museum down in Chandler called the Basha Collection.
Uh-huh.
And it was a private collection of Eddie Basha, who at one point ran the Basha grocery stores. And it's not curated the same way the Herd or Western Spirit is, but for someone who's interested in that sort of art, it's an amazing collection. He has in some cases hundreds of pieces by the same artist, so you can see like their development and style through time. It's a large collection, and unlike most things in Phoenix, for most museums, it's totally free. Only open weekdays, but it's an interesting thing most people don't know about. The last one I'd add that people should maybe think about is the Superstition Mountain Museum, which is a little more informal than most of the other museums I've mentioned. It's at the base of the Superstitions where the Apache Trail starts. They have some really cool mining memorabilia pieces. Well, not a huge equipment. They have some historic buildings and some historic looking buildings. So they've set up kind of like an old mining town. And it's really very atmospheric, and the location is stunning. It's in a beautiful, beautiful location.
Excellent. The other thing that we haven't talked about is why March is so busy in Phoenix, and it's going to be one of the more expensive times to go, and that's spring training. If you are a baseball fan, the number one reason that I have been to Phoenix over the last 20 years or so is to go down for spring training, where half of the American baseball teams, well, half of the American, U.S. and Canadian, will end up in Phoenix and the other half in Florida, and you can go down and see half the teams play in general, and how cheap it is depends on where you go. If you go to Scottsdale Stadium where the Giants play, you'll pay as much as you will for a game that you see in San Francisco. But on the other hand, if you go out to Glendale or Peoria, to one of the other stadiums where some of the Midwestern teams are playing, you can sometimes see a game for really cheap, a game and a hot dog, and can be quite a fun experience to go and see a number of the different teams all in a short period of time, which is why it is so popular. It will be a little more expensive to go that time of year, but that is a big draw in Phoenix. Spring training starts in February and then finishes at the end of March. Yeah. And really it's March that's the big thing, because that's when they start playing more games. The pitchers and catchers report in mid-February. So that is something that we have been down for many times and is good fun. But again, a little more expensive. If you got friends to stay with, that's a great time to go down. But flights are going to be a little more, hotels are going to be a little more.
Yeah, hotels are really challenged, and rental cars. I don't know if you guys fly or drive, but I have been there in March where there has not been a rental car available in Phoenix.
I can believe that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it seems amazing, but it's true. Because of the spring training and there is a lot of other. March is probably Phoenix's month for the best weather of the entire year.
It is a great time to be there. Usually, I have also been there during hailstorms in March. So usually good weather then, but not always.
And for hikers, the snakes aren't out yet.
Okay, good to know.
It's still too cold. It's warm enough for us, but not for the snakes generally.
Okay. That is always something to know. Couple things, other things for kids. There's a children's museum. I have not been there, so I cannot recommend it necessarily. But there is a zoo that our kids enjoyed when they were younger in Phoenix that was quite fun.
Some other things for kids too, but again, I don't travel with kids either, so it's harder. But the zoo is very nice. Yeah. U.S.
News and World Report that put that in their fourth on the list, even above the Phoenix Art Museum and some of the other places we've talked about. They put it above the Herd Museum, which I know is fighting words for you, but.
It's a zoo.
It's a good zoo, though. I would recommend that more in the shoulder season or in the winter. In the summer, that's going to be pretty warm.
Yeah, I mean, that's generally true. Anything outdoors you want to do, even the end of May, but for sure June through even September. I've been in there in late September, and it's still been really in the 90s or 100 degrees So early mornings or evenings are really when you want to be out and you want to do stuff that's inside and air conditioned. Every place is air conditioned in Phoenix.
It is a drier heat than you would find in the Midwest, East Coast, or the South, like an oven, but it gets quite warm. So, and there's, spas and golf courses and all sorts of other things that people go down to Phoenix for that I'll let you look up on your own. Anything else we want to tell people before we get to some of our wrap-up questions, Cindy?
The only thing I'd mention is that for looking for lodging in Phoenix, that there's really some key places if you want an urban experience to stay downtown Phoenix or downtown Scottsdale, or for a more laid back urban experience in one of the historic districts in Phoenix. They actually have a lot of historic districts and there's a fair amount of Airbnbs in them.
Okay.
Luxury resorts up north in Scottsdale, or I like the Desert Escapes out on the eastern edge of the metro area. You can find some spectacular places out there with great views, and you can hike right out your door.
Well, and I should say that if you're looking at a map of Phoenix, almost everything we covered, other than some of the parks that we went out and hiked in, were in the eastern part of that circle that I drew around Phoenix with Highway 101 and Highway 10. Almost everything we did was to the east of Highway 17, which runs north and south, sort of in the center of Phoenix. We didn't talk about places like Sun City, where a lot of the retirees are, and some of that area. That's a little less interesting to me, unless you're really fond of AstroTurf lawns and things like that. We also, though, didn't talk about Mesa and Tempe, which you say is where you stay. Is there anything we want to say about those areas?
Well, I usually stay in the farther eastern part of Mesa or north up along the mountains, but downtown Mesa is really starting to have a rebirth and is becoming an interesting arts area. They've done a lot of landscaping. They've put in a beautiful art center. They have some historic buildings. They lost a lot of them, but they have some. There's a historic neighborhood. So it's becoming a really attractive place to stay and a little more urban stay, but not being in Phoenix. It's a lot cheaper than downtown Phoenix or Scottsdale. Tempe, I have not stayed in Tempe, but we've gone down there. It's on the light rail. We've stopped there a few times to eat and check it out. And that is, of course, where Arizona State University is located. That's probably the liveliest place in the Phoenix metro area right now. There's all sorts of bars and restaurants. And while a lot of it's aimed at college students, not all of it is. And it's become a real interesting urban place to kind of hang out and eat and do things and be outside, and they've got some great parks. And so again, that's a more urban area, especially for younger people. There's a lot more nightlife. I have been in restaurants in Phoenix and Mesa recently that 8:30 you're eating dinner and they're starting to put the tables on the chairs on the tables and close up for the night. So if you want to be out a little later, Scottsdale or Tempe is probably your best place to go and look for a little bit of nightlife.
Excellent. All right. You're standing in the prettiest spot in Phoenix. Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
This is cheating, but I think the prettiest place in Phoenix is any place where I can see a saguaro cactus silhouetted against the setting sun.
Okay.
That's just my favorite thing.
Can you
and
think
that's
of
a lot of places.
That is a lot of places. Can you think of one place in particular?
I'm very partial to Lost Dutchman State Park because you can see the Saguaro Mountains on one side, or the Saguaro Mountains, the Superstition Mountains on one side, and you can see Phoenix off in the distance, and so you kind of have the best of everything.
Excellent. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Phoenix.
It's the fountains. It's getting better. There are water features everywhere in Phoenix, just everywhere. And they recycle all the water. I understand that it's reused water and they reuse it 4 or 5 times even before it gets in the fountains. But it still seems just crazy to see all these cactuses growing alongside these beautiful ponds around the green fields and golf courses and lawns. It's crazy.
Excellent. And if you had to summarize Phoenix in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Vibrant, artsy, and saguaro.
Excellent. Well, we didn't talk about the cactuses though so much. The one thing that may surprise you if you're not from the area is how old these cactuses are, because I think a saguaro cactus won't even get an arm, a limb, until it's like 100 years old, if I recall correctly. So if you see something up there that's got 2, 3, 4 arms as a cactus, it is hundreds of years old. So be careful with them, be gentle with them, but they are very interesting adaptations of plants that grow in the area.
Yeah, and they're only found in the Sonoran Desert. So they're only found in the central southern Arizona and into Mexico. And in Phoenix, you see them planted on the roadsides and all over the place, and they're just everywhere. But they're cool. They're so cool.
And Cindy, if we wanted to send people to the best post on Phoenix at explorationvacation.net, what post would we send them to?
I have a separate landing page for exploring Phoenix and the Valley of the Sun that has just some summaries and then has links to a few other stories and things. A lot of the places I've talked about, I haven't actually written about because I'm down there so often, I don't get things written up.
Excellent. Our guest again has been Cindy Carlsson from explorationvacation.net. Cindy, thanks so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love of Phoenix.
Thanks, Chris. It was really fun. It's always fun to talk to you.
Couple new things on the Amateur Traveler blog. One is I finally got around to writing up some of the Amateur Traveler trips in blog format. So if you're interested in reading about Morocco, Cambodia, or India, you can check those out at the top page of Amateur Traveler. Also, we just got back from Portland, and there's a couple articles there about things to do in Portland in winter and best Portland food trucks and carts. So check those out, amateurtraveler.com. If you're looking for California content on the Amateur Traveler, you're going to have to go instead to californiatravelmedia.com. All that content got moved to a new California website that I'm going to be putting some work into. I heard from Kyle this week, and Kyle said, I just wanted to send you a quick note of appreciation. I came across the Amateur Traveler podcast years ago via your Tech in Travel Minute features on Tom Merritt's Daily Tech News Show podcast. I've been a regular listener ever since. Last fall, my wife and I moved from Pennsylvania to Brussels for an expat assignment. I've been combing through the Amateur Traveler archives since then and binging the European episodes to help decide where we should travel on our new home continent. You've created such an invaluable resource with the rich catalog of travel experience. Please do keep up the good work. Regards, Kyle. And thanks so much, Kyle. It was great to get your email. And also, if people don't know what he's talking about, for now over 2 years, I've been doing once a week just a quick tech in travel tip for the Daily Tech News Show, which is my daily tech news show of choice. I'm a regular listener of that show as well. With that, we'll bring an end to this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.